Hi there. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Arthritis Life podcast, where we share arthritis life stories and tips for thriving with autoimmune arthritis. My name is Cheryl Crow, and I am passionate about helping people navigate real life with arthritis beyond joint pain. I've been living with rheumatoid arthritis for 20 years, and I'm also a mom, occupational therapist, video creator, support group leader, and I created the Rheum to Thrive self-management program. I am so excited to help you live a more empowered life with arthritis. We're going to cover everything from kitchen life hacks to navigating the healthcare system to coping with friends who just don't get it. Seriously, no topic is going to be off limits on this podcast. My interviewees and I share our honest stories of how chronic illness affects our lives. This includes discussions about mental health, sex, shame, pregnancy, body image, advocacy, self-acceptance, and so much more. You'll hear stories from all ends of the spectrum, from a person who's living in medicated remission from psoriatic arthritis to somebody living with severe mobility restrictions and severe pain from rheumatoid arthritis. You'll hear how people manage their conditions in different ways, like medications, mindfulness, movement, social support, work accommodations, and so much more. You'll also hear from rheumatology experts who just get it. We'll dive deep into the science behind chronic pain and what's the latest evidence for lifestyle changes that can help you thrive with arthritis, including exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, and more. This is your chance to sit down and chat with a friend who's been there. Ready to figure out how to manage your arthritis life? Let's get started. All right. I'm so excited to have Chrissy back on the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm excited to be back.
Yay. So people can learn more about your story on episode 154 of this podcast. But can you first just let people know, where do you live and what is your relationship to arthritis?
Yes. So I kind of split my time between Syracuse, New York, and the Los Angeles area. And my relationship to arthritis, I guess if we go back to the very, very beginning, I pretty much have been symptomatic with some kind of inflammatory arthritis as far back as I can remember, grade school level memories. But a diagnosis did not come until 2021. Originally diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, I think really just to give a name till you have some kind of autoimmune inflammatory arthritis condition. We don't really know what it is, so we're going to call it RA. But recently, about 3 months ago, that was changed to ankylosing spondylitis. So I am learning to navigate a new condition that is very similar to RA really in many ways, but is kind of new territory.
Yeah, well, and it's something's in the air because you're the third friend of mine that has gotten their diagnosis changed or a new diagnosis added on. Like in Eileen's case, she now has RA and got added ankylosing spondylitis versus or non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, where there also are a few people in addition to you that have gotten their diagnosis changed. Can you explain, again, if people want to hear your full story at the time in episode 154, they could do that. But can you explain a little bit more? What were some of the things that led you? Because this wasn't just something that your healthcare team figured out. It was very much generated from you. What were some of the things steps that you took and things you noticed that led you to kind of seek a reevaluation of your diagnosis?
Yeah. So we were really doing a sort of treat the symptoms strategy because again, it was like I was responding to a biologic. And so we knew there was some like autoimmune component, but not exactly what it was. So my symptoms were pretty well controlled, but my blood work was still like my inflammation markers in my blood work were still elevated. And they were pretty steady and they were lower than they were like when I was diagnosed. But I was still concerned about that, mostly because of all of the other things that come with inflammatory arthritis, like that chronic systemic inflammation and like cardiovascular risks and things like that. So I had been asking for a while, are we just going to continue this treatment forever or what's kind of the plan? And the practice I was at, I saw one of two doctors, depending on the appointment. And they both were like, oh, you're stable. Like your symptoms are pretty good. We're just going to, I think it was kind of a, if it ain't broke strategy. I kind of ended up seeing a different doctor as a result of just like some things going on in my life and geography. And I could get in with someone new. And the timing just seemed right to be like, you know what? Let's just see what somebody else has to say. I wasn't unhappy with my care, but I was also like, I'm not sure if this is it. I am HLA-B27 positive, which is like an antibody that I think like most people who have it don't have any kind of chronic condition, but most people who have ankylosing spondylitis have that antibody kind of situation. So I was positive for that. And I remember my original rheumatologist was like, well, this is often associated with ankylosing spondylitis, but you're a woman. And I think historically, AS has been associated with men. And so it was kind of dismissed from the beginning. But I have always had problems with my back, and ankylosing spondylitis is kind of associated with inflammation in a very specific area in sacroiliac joints. And it's really interesting. I went back and looked at my like clinical notes, and I have in my like the notes that the doctor wrote down all the way back to at least 2023 complaints about back pain and the HLA-B27, and they still were like, nah. So anyway, I saw this new doctor. He saw the HLA-B27 and immediately was like, we're getting an MRI. And the MRI showed both inflammation and damage in the sacroiliac joints. And so that in combination with the antibody and my symptoms, like primarily my large joints are affected. I do have a little bit of pain and swelling sometimes in my hands, but not those like smaller joints that are more often associated with RA. So all of this combined is kind of like a slam dunk, I think, for ankylosing spondylitis. So change the diagnosis pretty quickly and change my treatment immediately. And I think that was going to happen regardless of what we were calling it. And I've had a very fast and positive response to the new treatment. So I was hesitant, I think, to get a second opinion because I was like, no, this is fine. Everything's fine. And for some reason, it was kind of intimidating to be like, oh, if I go talk to somebody else, is my other doctor going to find out and be mad or something? And I've got a good thing going, so I don't want to mess that up. But it turned out to kind of radically change the course of my disease and my symptoms and everything else. So,
yeah. Well, and I just want to sprinkle in. So first of all, thank you for sharing that because it is a big deal to have your diagnosis changed. And I definitely just a few educational points to sprinkle in there is that, sacroiliac, that's like the base of your spine pain is really not common in rheumatoid arthritis, and any sort of axial or spine pain is not common. It doesn't mean that it never happens, but it's one of the things that a lot of rheumatologists use in what they call the differential diagnosis to differentiate, okay, they have some sort of inflammatory arthritis. Is it psoriatic arthritis, which can mimic the other two, or is it, axial spondyloarthritis, which could be either non-radiographic or radiographic. In the case it's radiographic, it's ankylosing spondylitis, or is it rheumatoid arthritis? And anyway, point being that the other thing that is looked at is that HLA-B27, it's not an antibody, it's a gene variant. So it's like it's a genetic.
Did I say antibody?
Yeah, I think you accidentally said antibody, but just,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. But you're right to say that it's one of the confusing things is majority or a lot of people who have AS, ankylosing spondylitis, have that gene variant. But the majority of people who have that gene variant do not have AS. So it's kind of like a lot of this stuff is like a study in statistics. But yeah, I just want people to, people listening, it is hard that I always use the example of diabetes. With diabetes, there's a very clear line in the sand. Where if your fasting blood sugar is above X number, which we take with a very simple blood test, you have diabetes, like no questions asked. Now, is it type 1 or is it, type 2? That's a whole other thing. But where there's not this complete straight shot diagnosis for any of these, but you take, that's what's called diagnosis of an exclusion. The doctors take all the data together and make that diagnosis, but that puts patients in a position of having to deal with uncertainty. Because even when you follow a textbook definition, you still kind of have this lingering doubt. At least I do in the back of my mind. Is it really this,
Yeah. And that's an interesting point because my symptoms were so well controlled that I was actually, when all this happened, I was going through for several months this kind of weird period where I was having some doubts. Am I even sick? Is that
I had that
even?
before too. I think when you're doing well,
And
even though you're treated, you're like, I'm on medication. So
it's weird. It was a really weird feeling and almost like chronic illness imposter syndrome. Should I be in these groups? Should I be talking to people? Because like I'm feeling okay. Am I really? Is this just a big mistake? And so getting a different diagnosis sure snapped me out of that quick because now I have like real proof of the damage and all that stuff. So it was a roller coaster that last 6 months of the 2025, I think, where I was like, am I even sick to, oh, I am. And it's something new.
yeah, I think it's so common to have that imposter syndrome. And actually, we've, in the course of running the Room to Thrive support groups over the last now 6 years, actually, I've definitely had people who you can even start the program feeling like not great. And then if your treatment starts kicking in,
Mhm.
people can start feeling, wait a minute, do I even belong? Do I belong in a support group anymore? But it's still something that affects your life, even if it's well-controlled disease. Or there are people also who their diagnosis genuinely gets changed and it's maybe not even a rheumatic disease anymore, but they still feel connected to the people in the group and they still have the symptoms of fatigue or like pain or brain fog. And so they still need that support system. But I'm really glad you brought that up because I think it's not something a lot of people talk about.
Mhm.
And the second thing I wanted to briefly say that I'm going to put in the show notes links to like learning about the HLA-B 2017 variant and also a site that I found extremely helpful, which is a radiology assisted website out of the Netherlands. And it's a giant long web page that shows visuals that are like, kind of simplified graphics and real x-rays of people with different kinds of arthritis. So osteoarthritis, gout, erosive osteoarthritis, RA, psoriatic arthritis, scleroderma, rheumatoid arthritis. And it's great because it shows you like exactly what it might look like, because you're right that even the blood work doesn't tell the whole story. The physical
Mhm.
exam doesn't tell the whole story. But when you're having that imposter syndrome, like I know I have things that show up on the imaging as well for my rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. So in a way that could kind of help you feel more validated.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thank you for sharing that. It's a very destabilizing feeling, I think, to get your diagnosis changed. But I think talking about it and sharing our stories is obviously huge because then other people
Mhm.
listening who've had that experience know that, they're not alone. And the other thing, the main topic today, on top of just catching up with you and letting everyone know that in just a year, a lot can change.
Yeah.
But also, this episode I'm announcing that, after facilitating all of the Room to Thrive support groups starting in 2020 until now, early 2026, I have started training a small, select, wonderful group of others who've taken the program who are interested in becoming certified Room to Thrive facilitators. And this year, you are one of them, and you're going to be starting your own group, which I'm so excited about. So, yeah. So can you tell me a little more, like what made you interested in being a facilitator? Because it's a big job. It's a big responsibility. If you have ever felt completely lost or utterly alone while trying to navigate real life with rheumatic disease, listen up. I am here for you. I created an educational program to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. And it's called Room to Thrive. After earning a master's in occupational therapy and completing hundreds of hours of additional training, I created a step-by-step guide to help you truly thrive with rheumatic disease. This is the only program I know of that's designed to improve quality of life for people living with inflammatory, autoimmune forms of arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, Sjogren's disease, and more. During the self-paced lessons, you'll learn how to manage pain and fatigue, cope with stress, navigate relationships, and continue doing the things that matter to you and bring you joy. The goal is really to help you improve your quality of life and learn how to thrive with your rheumatic disease right now, rather than waiting for a distant day when it might be cured or healed. I really created the down-to-earth, practical, heartfelt resource I wish I had had when I was first diagnosed at age 20. If you want even more in-depth support, you can join the 12-week Rheum to Thrive virtual support group, where you'll be surrounded by people who actually get what you're going through, people who will provide the encouragement, validation, and support that you deserve. Each group is expertly moderated, so you don't have to worry about the kind of misinformation that spreads like wildfire in the free-for-all social media groups. If you're on the fence, don't just take my word for it. Here's what Katie had to say in March 2023. I was lost and overwhelmed with my RA diagnosis. It felt overwhelming to know what to read, what to do, how to spend my energy trying to research on the internet. Rheum to Thrive did that for me. It's been like getting a crash course in my diagnosis along with a community who gets it. To see all the details, including the dates for the next support groups, go to the link in the show notes or bit.ly/thrive-rheum with a capital T and capital R. You can also just email me anytime at info@myarthritislife.net. And don't delay if you're interested, because each group is capped at 16 people or less in order to make a small, intimate group atmosphere. Thanks so much for your time, and I can't wait to get started with the next groups. And I can't wait for those of you who are interested in the self-paced option to go ahead and join that at any time. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah. So I think the biggest reason is just I get so much value as a participant that it's okay. I want to make sure other people have this opportunity too. It like being part of a support group just fundamentally changed my path with a chronic illness. And I really don't know what I would have done without it. And so that like kind of need to make sure that it's available to other people is really the motivator for me. The other part of it, though, is also just like you always learn something new, whether you're a participant or a facilitator or however you're involved with the support group. There's just always something like the world of rheumatic disease is so everybody's got a different path and a different situation, but there's so much overlap too, and there's so much information to try and consume that you don't know what you don't know. Like being able to interact with other people is just a constant learning experience. And so keeping, involved in that kind of community is important for my own disease management, I guess.
I mean, 100%. I know this maybe even sounds cliche. Like I know a lot of times teachers will say, I learned as much from you as you learned from me.
Right.
It does happen because every person with a chronic condition becomes an expert in their own care and in their own experience. And yeah, every time I've done one of these groups, I've also learned a lot too. But you're right. It's also it's very gratifying to be able to, be in that role of helping others kind of have that transformation between feeling so lost and alone and overwhelmed to like then feeling more grounded. And I wanted to know a little bit, like what stood out to you most about co-facilitating the most recent cohort, which, okay, I should stop and say. So the most recent group that ran for the Rheum to Thrive support group was from September 2025 to January 2026. And so I had you and two other facilitators in training where I started, the first couple of meetings, and then I was training you in how the program goes. What were some of the things that you liked the most about it, or that stood out to you about what the participants got out of the program?
Yeah, it's the same but different being in the facilitator role than part of the cohort. And so it was just really interesting to see like what different things would come up in conversation and kind of where the conversations would go. Every cohort is going to be different. And something I really like about the cohort structure, and I felt like happened with that group, was it's not just the course material, but when you're spending months with people, you kind of bring other things to the table, like home management, or I have this thing that might not seem explicitly related to chronic illness, but my condition does impact it. And how are other people dealing with this kind of stuff? And so I really like that the facilitator gets to be part of that too. But yeah, really seeing like how different things are brought to the table with different groups as the facilitator. And it helps inform facilitation further in that group, but in future groups too. What are topics that keep coming up over and over again? What's important to this group? What do they like to discuss? What is maybe more uncomfortable? And so being able to tailor the discussion to the group is kind of like a cool experience too.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is interesting. I mean, group dynamics are such that, like you said, each group really is unique, yet there are the greatest hits, like the things that
Mm-hmm.
come up every time, right? Which is feeling like, you don't know exactly how to best prepare for an appointment. That comes up a lot. Or feeling, oh, I left that appointment and I immediately thought of 3 questions I should have asked. And we can help each other, work through that. And we can't control what we did this time, but we can control what we can do next time. Or feeling like it was hard to explain it to friends and family, or feeling like kind of maybe alienation in your social life, and being able to, but it manifests differently because the world in which the context of each person's world is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
But okay, I have a social effect of my RA. Everyone has some social effect, but the exact effect is going to be different, each group. So yeah, it's really, I hope you'll see what I've seen too is the more groups you do, it's just each one is its own world. And, in general, sorry, zooming back to the big perspective, like why you kind of already answered this, but why is a program like Rheum to Thrive especially important for inflammatory forms of arthritis?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of the reason for this program is like, how do we consolidate a massive amount of patient self education into one place? And again, I don't know like how I would have found out a lot of these things on my own. And so having a structured program, I think is super helpful where frankly, someone else has done a lot of the work to kind of just compile all the information and give it to you. And it is technical and it is science based, but there's also just like the human component too. And so it's kind of like tying everything together. Okay, these are need to knows. These are things about my condition from a medical standpoint that might be important for me to know. But I'm also able to talk about how those affect like how I cook dinner with a group of people who understand the exact same struggle that I'm having.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You kind of really paint a picture of it's the macro and the micro, kind of are constantly zooming back and forth. And, one thing that I don't think I've done the best job in the world on this podcast of walking people through the structure of the program. So this
Mhm.
wasn't a question that we plan on asking before, but would you mind? So let me know if you don't want to answer.
Yeah.
But could you describe a little bit like what a typical meeting structure is like for people who might, I think when people hear the idea of a support group or a self-management, educational support group, there's a lot of different ways they could be structured. So can you describe that a little bit for people who might not be sure if it's a good fit for them?
Sure. I mean, I think we have a nice little ease into the day with usually an icebreaker. And like everything is very come at your own pace, come at your own comfort level. Like you show up when you can. If you can't, that's okay too. If you need to have your camera off and just say, I'm really going through it today, that's totally cool. But yeah, usually an icebreaker, again, like very optional. They're usually like kind of silly, get to know you. I guess that's the point of an icebreaker, but kind of more personal preference kind of stuff. And then there is a topic for each meeting. And so the week prior, there is a video and some slides and things that you can review on your own time. And then that will be the content for the following meeting. And I mean, everyone has a different facilitation style. So your experience may vary, but, really kind of covering the high points of the material from the previous week's, I guess, curriculum, syllabus, whatever you want to
Yeah,
call
yeah.
it.
And I'll remind everyone that the THRIVE is an acronym. So it stands
Mhm.
for Tools for Pain and Fatigue, and then Helpful Habits, which is the exercise, nutrition, sleep. And then the R is the relationships, the I is the inner world, mental health. The V is valued activities, and E is executive function. That includes like getting organized and symptom tracking and advocacy and stuff like that. So it's like the educational materials broken down. So we're talking about one of those topics each week.
And they go in that order, and you have a couple meetings dedicated to each letter bucket.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So there's usually a good chunk of the time devoted to pretty open discussion about the material, and then just a kind of free for all. Usually the last like quarter to third of a meeting is just kind of open. We can continue talking about the topic if people have a lot to say about that. If someone has a question about, hey, I had this funny medication side effect, or does anybody have a tip for shoulder pain, or, what, anything, or look how cute my dog is today. It can really be very open ended, just kind of chatting with your cohort. So, and I really like I know the acronym is like handy and clever, but I do really like the sequence that things go through in the course, because I feel like it is a little like some of the more, for me anyway, some of the more like really educational components were up front. And then as time goes by, it sort of morphs into, okay, now what do I do with that? How do I implement these things? And so I really like the progression of the course. Here's the tool. Here's how I'm going to use it.
100%. And yeah, part of that, is a lucky accident because of like the order of the word thrive. And I was like, I want to stay in this order because but I still would have structured it that way, even if it didn't follow the word perfectly, because like things like inner world, like you're not comfortable in a group setting, usually talking about that until you've gotten to know people a little bit. So, well, if we start with things like, in a way, it impacts our quality of life so much, but it's also the low hanging fruit in terms of just complexity. In some ways, the tools for pain and fatigue are a little bit more, they're not as personal and emotional sometimes as talking about our relationships, like how our relationships are impacted, whether that's friendships, families, coworkers. And yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because, the structure of the program has changed a lot over the years. If anyone's listening who maybe did it back in 2020, 2021, I used to deliver all the educational material live. And so the first part of the meeting, I would deliver that material. And then the second part, we would have discussion about the topic of the week that I just talked about and anything else going on. And I just found that we didn't have enough time. And it was a lot of also mental load to have to process all that information and then immediately talk about it versus pre-recording. So even if you take the group with Chrissy, you'll be looking at the pre-recorded lecture of the week is still done by me. And then, but Chrissy's helping you bring it to life and answering questions about it and then helping you apply, like she said. So it's just so much, it makes the material really real and helps us also chunk it out. Cause it's like when you first get, I know, you're like, but I wanted to know everything and how am I going to manage this and that and fatigue and my, appointments. And you're like, okay, we'll do one topic a week. We're going to break it down. And yeah. So yeah. And you mentioned, different facilitators have different styles. That was actually one of the prime motivators for me in training other people to be facilitators. The logistical one of just being able to offer times that are outside of the times that I'm available is huge, right? Because a lot of people with rheumatoid arthritis feel worse in the morning and kind of better as the day goes on. I'm a morning person. So even though my joints might feel stiff in the morning, my brain is the best in the morning and then kind of deteriorate. No, and I kind of get like a mid-afternoon slump. And then if I take a rest, I'll feel better again a little bit. But a lot of people, either because of their circadian rhythm or because of their work schedule, they want or just need the meetings to be later in the day or in the evening. And I used to do that during initial COVID times, but now with my son having more activities, I'm not available. So long story short, that was one of the motivators for me to be able to offer the program to people whose schedules just don't line up with mine. The second one is that I truly believe that different styles, different personalities work for different people. I'm very bubbly and outgoing, and like for some people that just doesn't, or I use humor as a coping skill, and that might not jive with everyone. And there are other people that, and not even just if it's not their personality style, other people might also just want someone who has a different lived experience. I'm not an engineer, you're an engineer, or like,
Sure.
I'm a mom, you're not a mom, or whatever it is, like a role in life. And Eileen has the experience of being a single mom. She's going to be one of the facilitators too, or to tell she's Latina, and that is like a different, she brings that perspective. So having this larger like group of facilitators is going to be great. But can you talk a little more about your maybe facilitation style, or what the kind of environment you like to facilitate in groups?
Yeah. I'd say I'm like very where the wind blows the group. So there is a structure to the program and there is a topic. My style, I think, is kind of let's see where it goes. I'm not reading from a script. I'm not like very regimented. And some people want that. I am a little more, here's the topic. I'm going to give you a few things that I think are high points that might be, a nice kicking off point for discussion. Let it kind of run. The way I see my role is making sure that discussion can go where it needs to go, but we keep it related in some way to the topic at hand. And not to say we can't go off topic. A lot of that too will be like, hey, let's wait till the end and chat about it then. But I really like to just let the dynamic be the dynamic and kind of let everyone do their thing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so great because it really is, different groups have different flavors. Some groups, people are really talkative and want to, talk about ping pong through lots of different topics. Other times the groups are like, they really have a lot of like detailed questions on like medications, and obviously the groups are not therapy. They're not psychological therapy, and they're not medical. The groups are not medical advice ever. But we can answer people's general questions. They want to hear from another human being of, hey, like, do you find that your methotrexate side effects for like 12 hours after or 24? Because I hear different things. Or do you also deal with nausea? How do you cope with that? That kind of thing. Sometimes people are really like, there's that the mood that day is that people really want to talk about logistics. And other days it's like bigger, broader picture. Like, how do you all cope with uncertainty about the future? And like, how are you going to, am I going to be able to do my job? And, or other times people are like, I want to talk about doing my makeup and my hair,
Yeah. And also part of that going with the flow is if the group truly wants something more structured, like game on. I'm totally willing to come in and be like, here's the outline and this is what we're doing today. That's that group's dynamic. So I'm really kind of like to observe and see what's going on. And I wanted to mention something that this came up earlier, talking about the course progression and like getting more comfortable with the group as things go on. But there is a pretty like the heavy emphasis on this is a confidential space. And making sure that as we get to know each other, people might feel more comfortable opening up. But from the jump, this is what happens in the Thrive group stays in the Thrive group kind of situation. And so I think that's part of my approach too, is like, this is the safe space to talk about all these things and making it available for people to talk about the things that they need to.
Thank you for mentioning that. And yeah, I think one of the things that we do is I do, have it structured so that we record as a default. We record the meetings just so that if people maybe had to make an emergency medical appointment or just their schedule didn't allow them to attend live, they can still hear or watch the meeting recording. But we have it so that if anyone ever wishes to speak off the record, like they really want to just make sure there's no recording, they just are more comfortable with it being only live, we can pause the recording at any time so that it just lives in that moment. Because yeah, that's kind of a cornerstone of the group process is like confidentiality. And there's really, the ground rules are confidentiality and respect. And that said, now you might say, okay, well then why are you two even talking about the group? Because we're not talking any specificity about any members, except when I'll say, look, if a lot of people become genuinely friends, like offline friends, like not outside of the container of the group, people become genuine friends with each other in these cohorts. And so if you want to then share, like you both are okay publicly, let's say, making a cute dancing video together or something and saying, we met at the Room to Thrive group and now we're doing this. You can share about your own story, just not someone else's story without permission from them if you're using any sort of identifiers. So, you could say in the group today, like something very general, like in my support group today, we talked about, you know, our values and valued activities, and it made me think about this. That's totally fine, but you don't want to be like, and then Chrissy said that she values this, and then this happened.
Right.
You're like, what? Yeah. Honoring the confidentiality is in the safe space is huge. And I know that, both of us really believe in the power of support groups that outside of Room to Thrive. I mean, I created my own structure based on my occupational therapy perspective and my unique experience, but I don't think there's no one size fits all. There are definitely, I think people should have access to as many different kinds of groups so they can find one that fits our needs. And I participate in the Seattle area Arthritis Foundation Connect group. And I know you also have experience. You're a seasoned facilitator of an Arthritis Foundation Connect group yourself. So can you tell me a little bit, first of all, just about the group that you facilitate?
Yeah, I co-facilitate one that is for the greater Los Angeles area, as well as one that is focused on cycling. So the Connect groups are kind of like Arthritis Foundation's support group structure. Some are like location based, like LA or Seattle. Some are disease specific. So there's like a rheumatoid arthritis group. There's one for like parents of JA kids. And then there are like special interest groups. So cycling would be one of those. So I started when I got my first diagnosis, my original diagnosis. I didn't know anybody in real life who had any kind of like rheumatic disease or really chronic illness. So I like ran to the internet to save me and found the Arthritis Foundation Connect groups very quickly and joined one of those right away. And kind of over time have found myself in the facilitation role. And the same thing there. It was just like this was so important to the direction that my life went, frankly, with the diagnosis, that I just wanted to make sure that it was available to other people to have that resource available to them too.
Yeah, yeah. And, just full disclosure that those are free groups and they're funded through the fundraising of the Arthritis Foundation, and the way I've structured mine is that it is a paid program. So that's a difference. And I do offer scholarships and pay what you can options to mine, including I'm at the point where I'm at 99. I've given 99 scholarships. I know that I have like an application form. It's actually more than that because I didn't used to have a form. I used to just do it like via email. Then I was like, I need to have something more that I can keep track of easier. So I do offer a number of pay what you can options too, but it's just two different structures. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm a big fan of them. I've definitely learned a lot in the one I've gone to. And I started going to it when it was an in-person, thing. And it's really nice to connect to people. I did the Seattle general one. It's nice to connect to people in your community. I've made friendships there that I continue, but then they're also now with the virtual support groups are popular. It's really awesome because you can, if you're really interested in cycling and you live in like Nebraska, you can talk to Chrissy, who's in either New York or California, depending on what day you talk to her about cycling. Yeah. And what are some things that you've learned about, or what are some ways that facilitating the Arthritis Foundation Connect groups maybe shaped how you show up as a facilitator?
Yeah. So they're very different to, Room to Thrive has a structure. The Connect groups are like very open-ended. It's kind of whatever the facilitator brings to the group or whatever the group brings to the facilitator, I suppose. But it can be a little more open-ended. Some groups are really science heavy and bring doctors in. Some are very like, let's talk about breath work. And it can really just depend on what you get that month, which is awesome. There's a ton of variety, but it is, I think in many cases, a little less structured. I think that's not the meetings themselves. Like my meetings go through a very similar structure actually with like icebreaker, topic, open-ended, but month to month might be different. And I think that's probably informed a lot of my, hey, let's just go with the flow type of facilitation, because at least in my groups, the topics like vary wildly from month to month. And it's not a cohort structure.
Yeah.
So it's kind of people pop in whenever they can, feel like it, et cetera. So you're not necessarily with a set group for a set period of time. So I think that's probably where a lot of my like experience just lies, in something a little more fluid.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's one thing to just, if people are like looking at different options, like mine, the initial Room to Thrive program is, depending on the time of year, it's pretty much weekly or like 2 to 3 times a month, but it's sequential in terms of there is like a learning experience people are having. Now, I will say we don't require people watch any of the educational videos or read any of the educational content. It's an adult learning model, but it really is in occupational therapy world and psychology that we call this. It's really a self-management plus support group. It's not purely only support, but that's what people end up saying that's kind of like the secret sauce, is that it's a blend of both. But that being said, what we end up doing is like it's almost intensive, like an intensive, weekly thing for this 14 weeks. And then if you would like to meet continually, and that's all with one cohort, the same group of people. And then if you want to keep meeting weekly, we have the graduates, like alumni group, which I always want to mention because sometimes people forget that once you've done the initial program, you're eligible forever, as long as I run it, and as long as we run it, for the graduates group. And that is a lot more of the open-ended discussion, but I actually recently did start adding in the topics of the week, because I think what's nice about the topic of the week, again, like tools for pain and fatigue, or tools for just pain, tools for just fatigue, or talking about, relationships. Let's talk just about friendships this week. It kind of starts the conversation off with a common ground, like a common topic. And because some people open-ended, in my head, sometimes I have so many ideas and so many thoughts that I'm going to bounce around like perennially in an open-ended talk. And it's nice and other people have a hard time. They're on the opposite. They can't, even though they might have 100 questions, if you give them an open-ended prompt, they'll be like frozen. I can't even think of one, but if you're like, let's talk about fatigue. Oh, here's my questions about fatigue. It grounds the discussion. So again, they're just different things for different people.
I like the graduate structure too, having both the like very open-ended, but just like a touch of focus, because these conditions are so dynamic that, okay, I took the course 2 years ago, or in my case, if I had taken it a year ago, like a lot has changed, or your med stopped working or something. Like,
Yes.
I feel like very few people that I've encountered are like, here's my diagnosis, here's my treatment plan, this is what we're doing forever. Something's always. And so revisiting the topics, I think, is extremely helpful. Or you just hear something new for the first time and think, oh, wait a second, that might help me or something. So I really like that there's a continuation of the program, but it's not quite as, I don't know, dedicated, I guess, to that topic.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times people say, this is exactly how I would do it too. They'll say, well, I didn't really listen to that part in the beginning when I first did the program because it wasn't a problem for me at that time. So, there's a lot of information to learn. And so you're like, okay, I'm triaging right now I'm not dealing with fatigue. So I'm not really going to pay attention to that part. I'm not going to watch that video from the course or read the slides. And then, a year down the line, suddenly you're struggling with fatigue. And now you have this resource to go to, and not just the resource of my, self-paced materials, but also the others in the group. I mean, it's amazing what we learn from each other. And yeah, it's honestly been something that's been a pleasantly surprising how many people are like, some people are like, I'm just here to chat with my arthritis friends, but others are like going back and they're like, wait, yeah, I totally forgot about this stuff, or just apps or something. I stopped using an app to track my healthcare for a while, but then Guava came along and people had Guava. And I was like, let me check this out. I'll put a link to that in the chat because it's a very, really helpful free app that syncs up with your health records and makes it a lot easier to manage stuff. Just learning about that stuff is so great. And yeah. Well, this is so fun. I wanted to kind of zoom again to the big picture for someone listening who might be just on the fence in general about joining a support group, whether it's a Connect group in the Arthritis Foundation or whether it's my Room to Thrive group, or, I want to mention Spondylitis Association of America. They also, spondylitis.org, they are a great nonprofit. They also offer support groups and also some really fantastic live webinars, just like the Arthritis Foundation does. Yeah, but what would you say to somebody who's on the fence, maybe about joining a support group?
Yeah. So I'm very like open book about my health. I know a lot of people are extremely private. Like they don't want anybody to know what's going on. And I think that can be a barrier to joining a support group. Or I even was kind of like, I don't know these people. I don't know what I'm going to do. Is this going to be weird? I cannot emphasize enough how much like just being in a space with people who have a shared experience like lifts some of the burden. Even if you're not comfortable participating, just being in a place where people get it to any degree can be really helpful. And then it just goes up from there. I totally understand the hesitation to get on the internet with a bunch of strangers and talk about your health. But I've been participating in support groups again since like within weeks of my diagnosis. And I can't say I've had anything that's really made me feel worse, both emotionally or physically. And I think, again, with the cohort structure in particular, it's really nice to be able to get a comfort level with people. And if you're more into the fluid, like I just want to come and go, more Arthritis Foundation type thing, like that program is out there too. So it might be like some experimentation to find what you want and what clicks for you because, people have different preferences. But I would say give it a try, like even if it seems like a scary thing, because I get why that would be intimidating and you're dealing with pain and uncertainty and if you're not, I think Cheryl and I are both pretty extroverted people. So if you're not, if that's not your default and you're not like, I don't want to talk to people, that can be a challenge on top of a mountain of other challenges. But I would encourage people to give it a try and see, if there's a place that kind of fits with your needs and your personality.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think if we look at, I also want to acknowledge, I have this little blog post I made called like arthritis support group versus myth versus fact. And one of the myths I did say is because I'm trying to be like devil's advocate, and also be honest, like that, a myth would be the support groups are the best fit for every single person's needs. And if you're in a really dark place where you're not really, you really and you're not getting any mental health support at all. For some people, it's a better, if you have 1 hour a week to attend to your psychosocial or psychological emotional needs, it might be better to do a one-on-one formal therapy, right? Some people, I would say if you're at a place where you believe that no matter what you do or what you learn, you are feeling like crap and you're always going to feel like crap, then we need to triage that at the most basic level. Be like, you would probably be better served by one-on-one therapy because a group is not the most appropriate. I mean, like maybe group therapy by a mental health group therapy in that case versus this is a peer education, peer support, educational support. And, so I just want to acknowledge that. And some people just, even if they are in a mentally healthy place where they're feeling like optimistic for the future and stuff, they just don't prefer learning or interacting in a group. They want to get support one-on-one. It's great too. It's not like there's a one size fits all, but if your reason for not joining a group is based on things like myths that like all groups are full of misinformation or no one will really get it, then we want to help assuage those myths, right?
Yeah. And I talk about this all the time, but I have to throw this out there. One of the very first things I heard, I would say like within weeks, if not a week of my diagnosis, was watch the places where you spend your time. Look out for the Facebook group that's full of doom. And, I talk about there's always going to be like crummy days with chronic illness. And so whatever we can do to not pile on, I think is helpful. And, that I think surrounding yourself with realistic hope and positivity, not over the top, but it can really have an effect on like our physical outcomes too. But that piece about just like kind of watch out where you spend your time was important. And I think support groups, at least in my experience with Room to Thrive and the arthritis groups, are not that just like doom spiral where people show up to scream and yell. And I think both programs really focus on not, I guess, debunking misinformation and making sure people have, resources that are going to be truly helpful. So yeah, I'm glad you brought up the myth thing, because I think support group can come with a lot of preconceptions. And at the end of the day, it's like all those people sitting around talking like this. That's all it is. And I will say, I love the cohort structure, but I also, in the graduates group, like I have a hard time finding that hour in the middle of a weekday, but there's a Discord and I love participating in there. So that's, my need kind of force me into that piece. So it is not one size fits all. Like I'm still participating with the group. I'm still in contact with that graduate situation where I can talk to people, but I don't always have to be like on when I need a break or I have something else going on.
Yeah, you totally anticipated what I was going to say next, which is, one of the myths is that you have to physically show up or, even in a virtual group and talk a lot and be 100% on at every single meeting. There are people who do the whole program who never share their screen and they participate or they never talk and they participate in the chat, or people who the first 6 meetings, they're not comfortable and then they kind of slowly get comfortable, or people who can only make half of the live meetings, but then they participate in the offline. The Discord is just the technology that's we're using to have a private small group or a community where you can continue connecting with the members of your cohort outside of that hour a week. And so people continue, interacting there. And so I'm really glad you mentioned that. And also, there's a lot of the myths. And I'll get patients say, my doctor told me not to join a support group because they thought I'd get scared. And because everyone's going to be talking about worst case scenarios. And that really depends on how the groups are facilitated. We in the Rheum to Thrive, a huge priority for me is that maintaining a sense of realistic hope. Like we're not just Pollyanna, like everything's just going to be in your control if you just try hard enough and just think positive. But recognizing that some people have really difficult to treat disease. Some people don't get that wonderful experience of remission that other people get. And we're still going to devote ourselves to like figuring out how to thrive the best we can in our situation and support each other in doing that. And part of thriving is being able, in my opinion, being able to feel your feelings. And even if those feelings aren't comfortable, being able to allow yourself to let those waves of emotion go through you without feelings of shame or guilt, and, and saying, okay, and this is my one wild and precious life. And what am I going to do, with it is the goal. And there really is, like you mentioned, a lot of the word support group is used there's no one meaning of the word support group, but I definitely think on Facebook in particular, there's actually scientific evidence to back this up, that Facebook tends to have the most misinformation on their groups, whether that's for disease-specific groups for cancer, or I did a presentation on this, like how to combat misinformation online. Facebook groups tend to have the most misinformation. So, and the Facebook quote unquote support groups. And so you just, have to look at the source of who's sharing stuff and if they have any sort of other conflict of interest or anything.
And to be clear, this isn't saying you can't show up and vent. Like, the people have bad days.
100%.
That is totally allowed. But, making sure that we're not kind of like constantly going down the doom spiral is part of, being in a facilitated group.
Yeah, 100%. And were there any other worries you would say people have before joining a group that you would want to address? Or we kind of already addressed them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. To me, again, being extroverted, it's just like weird to show up and talk to people about your health, or am I complaining too much? Yeah, I grew up in that like system, be too annoying or something. I just think, it's almost like public speaking sometimes. Are people going to be looking? I honestly, if I'm not facilitating, my camera's off. Like that's how I'm comfortable in a meeting. I just turn everything off and I chill, talk. But, so I I think there are plenty of valid reasons that it could be a little spooky, but I think, we do lots of things brave with rheumatic disease. And that's another one to try, see if something fits.
Yeah, 100%. I have a new background for those watching the
Yeah.
video. It is, we can do hard things. It's one of my
Mhm.
mantras. So I love it.
I'll say one more thing. I don't think
yeah.
you need to be, we talk about every person is an expert in their disease, but I think that can be like a little intimidating too, coming in and being like, I don't know anything about anything. Somebody help me. It's hard to ask for help. It's hard to say, I don't know. And so part of the reason is to learn.
Right, right,
And
right,
so you don't need to come in with MD.
right. Yeah,
All trying to think.
yeah. I think it's definitely a loaded sentence to say everyone's like, you're the expert in how your disease has affected
Yes.
you in
Yeah.
your own journey, but you're not necessarily the medical expert. I certainly don't feel like a true I feel like I'm at the stage of like wisdom where I think it's like recognizing there's a lot still unknown about autoimmune and about arthritis specifically. So every day I learn more. So we're getting to the point where we're not going to do all the rapid fire questions today because we've already heard your answer to all of them. But I think sometimes our answers do change a little bit over time. So I'm curious, what would you say today are like your best words of wisdom for somebody who's newly diagnosed with inflammatory arthritis?
Yeah, so this I think actually stays the same and has been my mantra that life is different, but it's not over. When I was diagnosed, I just fell apart, honestly, and then kind of climbed out of that space. But I won't deny, like, something has changed and something like major has changed. But that doesn't mean that life is over. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy things. So that would be like, I think my big takeaway is, and I'd almost say like these diagnoses are scary, but I don't know that you need to be scared of it. There are resources, there are groups that can really help.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's definitely a huge lesson to learn. And you might have to learn it as me talking, having had rheumatoid arthritis now for over 22 years. You have to keep learning that lesson over. It's different,
Yeah.
not over. And what does it mean to you to live a good life and thrive with now ankylosing spondylitis?
I think my answer here has changed a little bit. And that's for me, it's much more about kind of accepting it. And I'd say my diagnosis does not define me. It is not, my identity, but it's part of my identity. And I think learning how to incorporate that into everything else that makes me has been a big part of learning to live with it and thriving with ankylosing spondylitis.
Yeah, I love that. You hit on my favorite word, acceptance. So
Yeah, I know.
that's not,
There's a
that's
couple
not,
times you said things and I'm like, that's acceptance.
yeah, I
And
know.
it is. I don't mean to use it in like a corny or suck up way, but it is. It just, that has been a shift where this new diagnosis was a roller coaster. And I was really upset about a lot of things or, like the medication challenges or whatever. And just being like, okay, you know what? This is just part of who I am. And that's how we're going to roll through your life. Everybody has a challenge. Everybody has something. And that is not to dismiss or minimize anybody's thing that they're struggling with. But for me, being able to learn how to fold it into the bigger picture has really, I think, been a key to kind of charging forward and having that good life with her rheumatic disease.
Yeah, and being willing and to adapt and adjust and not say, okay, well, I can't, for example, you doing the Coast Classic bike ride, saying, okay, I'm going to do it the way that works for my body now, not kind of saying, well, I'm not going to do it at all if I can't do it the way I used to.
That's actually like the perfect example of what I mean by it's just folded into the identity. And a big part of that is learning, or I'll go back to life is different, but it's not over. And this is a very difficult thing to learn. I don't know that I'm fully there with everything, but learning, okay, I can't do things that I used to be able to do. How can I modify those? How can I find a way to do what I want to do? And the California Coast Classic is a perfect example. Okay, I can't go run a half marathon, but I can get on a bike and I can ride that bike for 8 days, and acceptance is a part of that too, though. I want to do things I can't. I have to, find peace with that and say, but this other thing. So it's not over. It's not all a lost cause.
Yeah. Yeah. And learning how to unlearn that black and white thinking is definitely a
Hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners before we wrap up?
I cannot emphasize enough how much both the Arthritis Foundation program, but also Room to Thrive have, again, guided a major part of my treatment plan. I'll say that. And I've learned so much. It is really a you don't know what you don't know situation. And so, I would encourage people to explore it. If you're interested, take it for a little test drive, see what might fit, because it's interesting that you said some doctors recommend people don't attend support groups, because I feel like it flies under the radar a little bit. Like, we talk about meds, we talk about physical therapy, we talk about psychotherapy, but the support group piece is accessible and it really can make a major difference. So that would be my parting words is, give it a try if you're interested.
Yeah, 100%. And I do think that the doctor's concerns, most likely, I believe that they often come from those kind of I call them like the Wild West support groups.
Yeah.
Support groups, I'm putting in quotes, they're not really there's no facilitator training, no curation of information, just like a bunch of people shouting ideas and misinformation and fear mongering. And so those genuinely are not helpful in my opinion. But something like, what the Arthritis Foundation's curating, what I've done is, obviously I'm not going to be unbiased. They're meant to be an answer to those other things. Yeah, so I don't think providers should throw the baby out with the bathwater just because some
Totally
don't have valid information doesn't mean they all don't. And I think with just an overall embracing of mental health that I've really seen happen in the last 10 years, even though these aren't official, like capital MH, like mental health groups, there is obviously a emotional benefit to your psyche, to your mental health in participating in peer support groups. I think that it's kind of undeniable. So if people want to connect further with you, I'm of course putting links in the show notes to where people can sign up for the Room to Thrive program. Of course, they might be listening to this later, but they can still learn who is currently facilitating and who might be available. But where can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm pretty much anywhere on social media as Arthritic Chrissy. I have a blog at arthriticchrisy.com. So pretty much anywhere you can find me with that.
Love it. And she's good. She has a lot of good memes. So always
I love a good meme.
Yeah, Chrissy and I have ongoing conversations in meme form across social media platforms. We have a lot. I can't believe we didn't talk about Taylor Swift. Well, good job.
I know.
As Taylor Swift would.
You gotta get it in there some way.
Yeah.
But I too enjoy using humor to cope. So a good chronic illness meme just makes my day.
Yeah, I think people would be surprised how often humor comes up in the groups, whether explicitly like someone sharing a meme they found funny or just naturally bubbling up. Like, isn't this wild what someone said to me? And we just end up laughing. So laughing together is a great bonding experience. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled that you're going to be the first non-Cheryl facilitator of this program. I'm really excited because this is opening the doors for, more times that people can take the groups and more diversity of just facilitators. I think it's like a win-win for everyone. Oh, and I should say, just for the record, I'm not stopping facilitating groups. It's just I'm bringing in more people, and there'll be different times a year. It's always going to be like you kind of have to check on the website and see who is going to facilitate when, because even when it's been just me, I've always kind of changed depending on my availability. I'm going to do a group of this. I usually do one in the spring, one in the fall. I've been doing 3 or 4 in the spring and more in the fall. But so just always be sure to check on the website. So I'm not leaving or anything. I'm just bringing in more voices. So thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here and to kick off a new cohort.
All right. Bye for now.
Thank you so much for listening. This podcast is supported by Rheum to Thrive, an educational program I created to help empower you to live life to the fullest with rheumatic disease. In the program, you're going to learn evidence-based tools for managing all the ways rheumatic disease affects your life. And my goal is to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. You can go through the pre-recorded modules on your own in the self-paced course, or you can take the course along with a robust support group of new arthritis friends to support you and cheerlead you along the way. Learn more in the link in my show notes, or you can always go to www.myarthritislife.net. And if you like this podcast, I'd be so honored if you took the time to rate and review it. I also encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might benefit from it. I also want to remind you that you can find full transcripts, videos, and detailed show notes with hyperlinks for each episode on the Arthritis Life website, plus full episode videos on the Arthritis Life YouTube channel. If you have any ideas for content for future episodes, or you want to share your story on the podcast, please send me, Cheryl, an email at info@myarthritislife.net. I can't wait to hear from you, and thanks so much again for your time.